I haven't done a like a PowerPoint or anything like that. I just wanted to kind of do a bit of a casual chat about how I wound up getting into games because I think I might have one of the most like roundabout journeys into the industry that you'll come across. Certainly, kind of, it's up there. Um, there was a real pivotal moment for me, which was actually during my PhD. And I don't recommend PhDs based on my experience, didn't really enjoy it. Had a bit of a miserable 4.5 years writing that thing up. And right towards the end, I was feeling really, really rubbish, depressed, anxious, had no direction whatsoever. And my mum actually came down to visit me in London from Newcastle, which is where I'm from. And she sat me down and she was like, Melissa, I'm really concerned that you don't have a direction in life. What do you want? What do you want to do? That classic, the thing that people kind of often throw at, kind of when you've been categorized as like a gifted kid and they want to kind of, like you can do anything. And I pulled up a Eurogamer Let's Play video and I turned it around and it was Aoife Wilson and Johnny Chiodini playing Life is Strange. And I turned around the computer and I pointed at it and I was like, this is what I want to do. I think mum had been thinking more along the lines of like psychiatrist or like politician or something. So, I don't know if she quite knew what to make of that. But that was for me a kind of real pivotal moment because I don't know that I would have given that answer if I hadn't been really put on the spot. But the road to getting there and getting to that point, and then the road from there to actually working in the industry was a bit of a journey. When I was growing up, games were always seen as like my brother's thing. That was how it was sort of talked about in the family. He was literally playing one of the classic brick Game Boys when he was in a pram. He would, it was obsessive. He loved games, and I was always more of the support role. So he'd usually play while I would sit there reading the guides that you used to get with gaming magazines, the like 100% completion guides, get all the Skullatulas and Legend of Zelda, and I'd kind of read ahead, make sure we didn't miss anything. And between us, we'd kind of complete the game, but I was always kind of more in the background of that. I was always kind of like an academic kid. I went to a really competitive, like academic school where they would make you very conscious that you always had to fight for your place. So, they would publish all of the like rankings for kids in the reports, so you'd know your place in the class compared to everyone else, your place in the year group, and if you slipped below the top person of the next set, you'd lose your place. It was hyper competitive. I was very successful and it didn't make me particularly happy. I went to Durham for my undergrad and studied English literature because I really loved it. I was really interested in storytelling and how that kind of fit into our lives and how we conceive of the world. And I had a really good 3 years there. Still didn't plan my future particularly at all, and got towards the end and did the classic thing of panicking. Hadn't kind of got loads of work experience under my belt or anything like that. Done plenty of extracurriculars, things like organizing music festivals and stuff, but I'd never really kind of picked a career direction. And there were all these other kids who had, kind of been sort of groomed for a profession in like law or financial services, and they'd been doing work experience since they were about 16 years old. And I didn't have anything like that. I loved my degree. I didn't have the money to pursue a master's. There weren't loans for masters at the time. So I went into teaching as in the worst possible way, which is as a last resort. I have no other plan. Hi again, Lucy.
Hi, I think I'm back. You can hear me.
Oh yeah, we can hear you
sorry
now.
about that.
So yeah, I went into secondary school teaching for the worst possible reasons, which is that I couldn't think of anything else and panicked. Didn't go so well. I hated it. it made me really, really unhappy. I love kids. I loved the actual kind of content teaching part, but I hated a lot of things about the job, like the kind of the systems, the processes. And I was really, I really struggled because I was very empathetic towards kind of the pupils. I really cared about kind of, their kind of feelings about things and how they were doing. And I remember at one point, this woman who was in charge of overseeing me as a newly qualified teacher sat me down. She was like, don't care about their problems too much. You're just there to get them a C. You're not a social worker. And that was the point where I was like, can't do this. This isn't working. So that was reasonably rubbish. The way I actually got into doing my PhD was because it was like a rope to pull myself out of the hole of teaching. I was like, I can't do this. I need to do something else. And I got invited to apply for a scholarship, and managed to get it. Didn't do a master's in between. It was on the strength of kind of my academic work at undergrad and during my PGCE that they were able to kind of offer me a full scholarship, which was really fortunate, as part of an Arts and Humanities Research Council program, which was about researching multilingually, and it was all about kind of languages and borders in culture. And what I wound up doing my PhD on, which is nothing to do with games at all, was to do with how people who have undergone kind of traumatic migration specifically, experience emotions in their different languages. So I interviewed survivors of torture who were refugees who were doing creative writing. So that was a really intense thing to be working on. And I found that really, really challenging as well. During that time, I started kind of, having more of an interest in games kind of, semi-professionally. So I wrote a few pieces for kind of gaming websites. I kept trying to explain to my colleagues how Papers, Please, the game, was really relevant to the work we were doing, and how as a piece of artwork, it's something that we should look at. And all these, these academics would kind of nod, like understandingly, like, yeah, Melissa, she's so quirky. It was, in many ways, it was better than teaching. I was glad it gave me the opportunity to get out of that. But it was also a very isolating experience. When you're doing a kind of thesis that you just write up completely on your own, you are the only person who's that involved with the project. You're the only person who's that close to it. And especially when the content is quite challenging the way that mine was, that's not a great experience as well. So I became quite depressed. I was actually quite ill. And I wound up towards the end of my PhD getting medical treatment for that. And one of the things that I feel very passionately about is being very open about that and talking about it, because I put that off for a long time, actually, and I shouldn't have. And it was something that was really necessary to me for getting through that part of my life. I also focused a lot on side projects during that time to try and keep myself more balanced, so that I wasn't just kind of focusing all my time on the PhD. I actually wound up doing some marketing for a jewelry brand at that time, doing some social media marketing work. So I'm going to try and share my screen. Is this going to work? There we go. Yes, I'll share so I can show you the kind of things that I was focusing on. So I was producing content like this. Can everyone see that?
Yeah, I can see it. I think it's all good.
All right. So I was producing kind of, videos of jewelry. There's some beautiful opal earrings and things. And it was for a woman named Bibi. Absolutely lovely woman. Stop sharing my screen now because you don't need to see that. I was doing that on the side. It really gave me a kind of sense of purpose. Also, amazing free jewelry. It was really generous. It was, so that was, a bit of a bright side to my day. I felt like that was something that I enjoyed, but I found it quite difficult moving in that sort of world of fashion. I always felt like I was kind of trying to be someone I wasn't really. So, I was in the meantime watching loads of Let's Play videos, trying to finish writing up this thesis. And towards the end of that point, I had this conversation I mentioned at the beginning with my mum. where she was like, what do you want to do with your life, Melissa? This is a great question to ask depressed people, by the way. Hey, like, what's your plan for the rest of forever? Yeah, genuinely don't do that. But that was when I kind of said this, this thing about Eurogamer, like, oh, actually, you know what? I think I'd really like to do something like this. These are people who do this for a job, and actually, they seem really cool, and it seems like something that I'd really enjoy doing. So then I did the logical thing and went away and got a job in the fashion industry, which also didn't work out so well. So it was only for a few months. I was a community manager for a fashion tech platform, and wound up producing kind of lots of content like this that was, I'll show you another screen. There was this kind of very sort of like fashion bloggery kind of, it was all sustainable fashion. I'm moderately embarrassed now by that, but I spent a long time trying really hard to kind of be that sort of person and to fit into that sort of mold. And again, it's quite a restrictive mold. Even within kind of fashion tech and even within sustainable fashion, there was an expectation that to do that, you had to have a lot of disposable income that you weren't getting from your job, because it's not an industry that pays people especially well. But you also had to always have the latest stuff. You had to always look a certain way. And there's a lot of emphasis on how you presented yourself. A lot of emphasis on like your Instagram and things in a way that I found actually quite unpleasant. The company that hired me was actually in financial trouble, and it was kind of last one in, first one out. So I actually only wound up working there for a couple of months. So at this point, I'd finished my PhD, I passed that, and I kind of felt like, oh God, like I've put all that work into this PhD with the hope that it would make me like employable. And it hadn't really worked out. I felt like a complete failure at this point, because I was like, wow, like that's, I couldn't even get into a full-time job. So I felt sorry for myself for a while. And then I kind of picked myself up, brushed myself off, and really started reshaping my CV to games. I poured over it. I used Canva. I had like a little health bar with like pixelated hearts at the top. I did all this stuff because I was like, I really want this CV to scream, I'm actually a nerd who actually likes games, because I felt like I really needed to prove that, because I didn't have the career background in that. And I even got matching business cards as well, which I can show you. So I got matching business cards. The business cards had different kinds of like controller on them. I was really, really going kind of hell for leather on, look at me, I'm a gamer. I'm one of you people, please believe me. And so I also started making, I changed my website, changed my Twitter bio, made it all about games. And I started doing YouTube reviews of games. Now, at this point, I didn't have a job. I was very lucky that my partner had a job and was supporting me. And I was also super fortunate that we were able to live rent-free in a family place in London, which, enabled me to do all of this. But I definitely didn't have the disposable income to get an expensive streaming setup or an expensive recording setup. So what I did was I started focusing only on doing reviews of Apple Arcade games, because you can do all the screen grabs just from your phone. You can, record kind of the sounds. You can edit it all. I mean, I could produce the whole videos just on my phone. And there was this library of games that I could review and talk about without having to pay more than just a £5 a month subscription. And I was like, okay, I need to produce kind of content. So I made a few of those videos, which, posted kind of online, posted on a YouTube channel, posted on my Instagram. And then I plucked myself up and went to EGX. And I took a stack of CVs. I took those business cards. I'd made them match, color scheme and so on. And I got my CV reviewed about 5 times. I just literally endlessly went to those appointments. I went around the booths. I introduced myself and said, hey, I am looking to get into this industry. I've just finished my PhD. This is what I want to do. And the wonderful Hannah Flynn, actually, from Fail Better, reviewed my CV. And she really put in a lot of effort to take me under her wing. And she got in touch a couple of weeks after EGX and said, hey, there's this social media community manager role for this indie studio. It's just part-time, but it's a foot in the door. And I applied and I got it. I got the job and I spent a couple of months producing content, running a Discord, and it really cemented my decision that this was the area I wanted to be in. Then I got contacted by one of the very first jobs that I applied to when I started looking into games, and it was marketing strategist for an agency that works with indie studios, and it was Game of You Are, where I work now. You know, and I did the interview. It was a full-time job in games. I was like, you know what, this is, you know, this sounds perfect. And did a kind of presentation about what kind of things I did in my role and what kind of stuff I would do for different indie studios. And they called me a little bit later while I was actually on my honeymoon and said, we'd like to offer you the job. And I thought, you know, like, it's a foot in the door of games. This is going to be a foot in the door of games. You know, worst case scenario, it's like going to give me lots of experience. And then I started working there, and actually I really love it. It's a small company. It's actually one of my colleagues in the chat, Taya, who's absolutely lovely, our new assistant. And yeah, it's got such a wonderful atmosphere, and it went from being like, oh, this is a foot in the door of games, to actually, I really want to put down roots with this company. This is a job I really enjoy, content I really enjoy, and a team and a culture that I really love. So in the time I've been there since January, I've been able to actually advance from starting initially in strategy, like strategy manager role, to becoming a member of senior management, being able to help shape hiring, to be able to shape kind of policy and things like that. And I'm very fortunate that I'm in a company that really is serious about kind of being equitable and fair. We have, you know, a really progressive parental leave policy where all parents, regardless of biology, gender, etc., get a good chunk of paid time off. You know, this is something that is kind of really quite rare in the industry. So it took me a while. I've just turned 29 in August. But since January, I've worked on over 20 different indie titles. You know, helping them, getting great feedback from the devs who, you know, really do appreciate what you do, because when you work directly with small teams like that, you can really sense the difference that you made, and they can be really, really wonderful and appreciative. They've written me some, I needed to get some recommendations, and they've written me some absolutely phenomenally lovely things about how much it helped with their game. So, you know, maybe it took me till nearly 30, but I finally know what I want to do when I grow up. And thankfully, it's exactly the job I'm doing, which is fantastic. The one thing I would like to end on is that my major advice to anyone who's in any sort of hiring position or can influence the hiring at their workplace is to really push back against any like prerequisites that insist someone specifically has experience in games if it isn't 100% necessary. My other work in all of those different roles taught me lots of transferable skills, like public speaking and project management and social media, and, you know, all of these different things that I still use on a day-to-day. People who don't fit the mold of a typical gamer can often take a bit of a more circuitous route into the industry, and I think I'm an example of that. They're less likely to see it as an opportunity, you know, immediately straight out of school or university. So I really want to encourage kind of an open-mindedness about how people got to where they are. And if someone, you know, even if their experience is in something not exactly games, that can still be relevant, they can still make a contribution. If they seem like they've got the passion for it, take them at their word. Because ultimately you might find someone who, you know, as Taya is, who's mentioned she's just new to the industry, is actually really incredible. And I think that we should be about opening the industry up rather than closing it down. But yeah, so that's everything. I think we've got time for Q&A now, don't we, Lucy?
We do. Thank you, Melissa. What a fantastic talk, and I know everyone had some great comments in the chat there as well. Really, really interesting, and I can totally agree with you about sometimes paths are not that straight into things at all. I mean, for looking at the chat, just like Lucy over there has said, Maddox has said that she obviously feels that pressure too, that people won't believe or know about games because you're being female, and so sometimes you feel need to overcompensate. I mean, is that something that you've found a lot more in the industry? I mean, do you find that you feel being female, being a girl, or anything else, you know, sometimes people question that side of you, of knowing games and everything?
I think, I think yes, there's an extent to which people, sometimes, especially, I mean, one of the things that I think I have going for me is the fact that I have a PhD and my title is doctor, because people tend to be a bit like, oh, okay, so this person knows what they're doing, and I also have a kind of a complex enough thesis topic that I can say, if someone says, oh, what's it in? I can say intercultural communication and intersectional feminism. Then they kind of go, uh-huh, and don't really ask me any more questions. But I think especially for young women coming into the industry who maybe don't, and God, you shouldn't need kind of a PhD to give you the air of authority, but people who don't have something like that can find that they get a bit more scrutiny and get kind of, asked about like, oh, but, do you really get the game? Do you really understand it? And things like that. And there's kind of an assumption that, that women only play certain types of games, or that we all kind of, are only interested in kind of more casual games and things. Yeah. And no, that's not the case at all. I mean, for me, working in indies is perfect because I absolutely love, if you say to me, this game will make you cry, that's what I want. That's like me. So like,
think emotional connection as well. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's all about storytelling for me. It's not, although that being said, when I was super depressed and doing my PhD, I spent an absurd amount of time, like an actually embarrassing amount of time, playing The Binding of Isaac. Which I mean, a lot of people seem to pick this as their depression game. I'm not entirely sure why, because it's dark as hell. You're kind of you're a child and you're fighting monsters with your tears. Like, it speaks to a psychology. Extremely Freudian game as well, and I racked up so many hours on that at one point I was getting into the top 10 on the daily challenge globally. So when people are like, oh, like what games do you play? I could be like, oh, like I have this amount of hours, and it was one of those things where people would be like, oh yeah, hardcore gamers, no judgment, and then you'd be like, I've played it this much, and they're like, ooh, no problem. So I don't think anyone will question it.
Fantastic. It's really interesting. Do you think, just going back to your career path and everything else, and by the way, anyone, just to ask questions in the chat tab, otherwise I'm going to bug Melissa completely with all my questions. But would you ever change anything now? I mean, you've obviously had a sort of disjointed career into games, but actually looking back now, do you feel that's actually led you to the right place? And that sometimes you have to kind of go down bad paths or the wrong paths?
In some ways, yeah. And like, I don't want to kind of come across as, I'm really grateful for the opportunities that I have had. Like, not everyone gets to do a fully funded scholarship PhD. That's, really rare. Not everyone gets to kind of, work in London. There are people who would, do anything to work in fashion in London, for example. Like these are things that people really want, that just weren't making me happy. I think that for me, I am simultaneously torn between feeling like, actually, this is what let me get to this point. If it hadn't been for kind of, taking these steps, doing things like going to EGX and networking my little socks off, which I was enabled to do by the fact that I was living in London, which I was enabled to do by all these other things, then I wouldn't be here. But then in some ways I also look at it and think, oh God, like I wish that I could have got into games much sooner, because I could be at a point now where I had like 6-7 years under my belt easily in the industry, and so many kind of roles, and so many companies only take you seriously. It's literally, you see the descriptions, it's like must have 5+ years in games, and it's like, well, I did different things, but I'm definitely at that point of seniority in my career. So yeah, I'm mixed on that, but it's always, shoulda, woulda, coulda. It's impossible to say what would have happened if things had been.
The best thing is you've ended up in the right place for you now, and that you're really loving what you're doing. It really is great. So just going to go to the chat. I know Samantha has said something. She said, oh, thank you so much for your inspiring talk. I'm currently working on my PhD researching agency and choice-making practices in narrative video games, but I don't think I'll want to stay in academia afterwards. I love doing research though. Do you have any tips or using research skills in the games industry, or how to adapt it to something that makes sense in the industry?
Oh, absolutely. So, I mean, on a day-to-day, a lot of what we do in our team is research. There's a lot of crossover between skills that I learned on my PhD and the skills now. The only difference is where you're going for your information. So, I spend a lot of time doing competitor research and analysis on kind of games similar to, games that we're planning to market, looking at what have the competition done, how have they kind of connected with their audience, how can we replicate or improve upon that. That's a research skill.
Yeah.
Spend time researching the games themselves. If someone comes to me and says, hey, I've got this game and this is the current state of it, help us kind of with a path to market. The very first thing you're going to do is a full-on asset review, which is again a kind of research where you look at the game, look at their website, look at their social media, gather all that data, and then synthesize that into stuff that you can make a strategy and make recommendations from. Any kind of strategic marketing, and actually, to be honest, I would say also any sort of social media and so on. And I mean, I can't speak to the whole games industry, but a lot of marketing is data driven, and if you can show that you're able to process information and turn that into actions and reports and things like that, then that's really relevant. And especially, I mean, your PhD sounds really cool, and I would actually really like to read it. So please, Samantha, do get in touch after this. All my kind of socials are on my profile. But that's the fact that your PhD is actually about games as well. It really shows a dedication and an interest in the field. And I think that there's a lot that you could turn into narrative design if you wanted to become a narrative designer yourself, or kind of helping studios that are making narrative games, narrative consultancy and that sort of thing in that as well. Like, I mean, the sky's the limit. Sounds like an awesome project.
It really does. I mean, it sounds amazing. Way beyond me. It sounds fantastic. Just on that, you've obviously, moving back to your talk, you also said, like, this is my guide to anyone who's a talent recruiter, which I thought was a fantastic thing to say, because of I also agree with you. Sometimes it's not necessarily the games experience, but please, look at someone as a rounded whole. On the opposite side, what's your biggest tips for those who have been in your position and want to go out there and really get into the games industry?
So there's a few things. First of all, I think games is an industry, and certainly in the UK where I am, like, everyone knows everyone, and the best things that you can do is try and get to know people. The lucky thing is that there's a lot of very friendly people in this industry, and I really owe quite a lot to people like Hannah, who kind of took me under their wing. To I'm part of Limit Break mentorship now, which helps kind of women and marginalized genders have kind of mentor connections, and my mentor is Hayley, who's the head of brand communications for Mediatonic, and she's just amazing. So there's a lot of resources to draw upon. There's also Into Games, which is another mentorship scheme people can sign up for that will help you to make that first contact in the industry. I mentor through Into Games, and I got my mentee, a guy named Alfie, into his first kind of social media management and community management part-time position in a game industry through that. And it's just an indie developer, but it's a foot in the door. I would always recommend that you try and do things that demonstrate your interest. So even if it's not, necessarily like professional work, things like what I did, where I started a YouTube channel and started doing these review videos just to demonstrate, hey, look, A, I can edit videos, B, I understand games, C, I'm a decent presenter, please, for the love of God, give me a job. That's a kind of, that's something that you can do in your spare time to demonstrate it. The only problem is, obviously, if you're looking around a full-time job, then it's very challenging to make the time for that as well. I would also recommend, so one of the things I did on my CV, my gamer CV, is in the side column, just under kind of like, my skills and education, stuff like that, I had now, and put a couple of games on that I was playing now, and I deliberately picked an interesting kind of couple that were kind of talking points, that if someone said to me like, oh, like, what did you think of, XYZ, then I'd be able to say, oh, actually, and talk about it in detail.
Really show that side to you, that, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's a, thinking outside the box thing.
Definitely. Well, it's fantastic. Thank you so much, Melissa, for joining us and for your amazing talk. And as I said, Melissa said you can get in contact with her. I mean, her details are here if people want to chat and learn more. And I know she definitely wants to hear from Samantha about her PhD, so that would be fantastic. Should we end just on, Melissa, when ignoring Binding Isaac, what's your favourite game of all time? Or is that too big a question?
Oh God, the pressure is on. I'm gonna completely cheat and tell you my favorite game right now, which is Guildlings, which is one of the Apple Arcade games that I reviewed, and actually off the back of that we wound up being able to talk to the devs and things. But it's a lovely little game. It's so progressive and like endlessly just full of joy, very colourful, and diverse cast. It's just great. Taya is just saying she's starting the whole team about this. Just go and
we'll have to go
get Apple Arcade and get Guildlings because it's absolutely fab.
Okay, that sounds fantastic. Well, thanks again, Melissa, and for your insightful chats and everything else. And thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care. Bye.